Hello and a very warm welcome to today's webinar, brought to you by Shared Services Link and sponsored by ESCA. So today we're looking in particular at the accounts payable process, and we're really zooming in on benchmarking your accounts payable KPIs, key performance indicators, against the KPIs of top industry metrics. So your presenters for today are myself, Susie West. I'm the founder and CEO at Shared Services Link, and Julie May, who is Business Development Manager at ESCA. Julie's been with ESCA for 5 years and has really been involved in the world of business process for about 15. So she is in an excellent position to be really leading this session today. You also have a very important role to play because the format, ladies and gentlemen, is highly interactive. So I'm going to walk you through how this session is going to work. You'll recall that we sent you some homework to do over the last few days, and that was really asking you to gather data around your 7 KPIs. And what we're going to be doing moving forward over the course of the next 60 minutes is working through 7 chapters, or 7 chapters on the KPI piece for sure. And how that's going to work is Julie will be talking about the importance of that particular KPI in that chapter. We'll then run a live benchmarking poll, which I'll be running, and then I'll be handing back to Julie, who's going to be cross-referencing or comparing the live poll that we're doing in that particular chapter with the KPI that's been captured in the wider industry. So that's how the format's going to work for the next 60 minutes. And also just to remind you as well, another role that you have to play is to, I'm sure you all have very inquiring minds and will want to really dig deep and tap into Julie's expertise and have her answer some questions on this webinar. So in the last 10 minutes, we will be putting aside some time for you to be asking questions to Julie. And how that works is you can see there's a box highlighted here in red. So just enter your question into that box and send it to me, and I will put it to Julie on your behalf. So please do take advantage of that. So let's now have a look at the context before we go into our first set of benchmarking stats. So many of you will be working within a shared services environment. And one of the characteristics of shared services is that it is always looking to continuously improve. And this is one of the many ways it differs from being a centralized finance operation. So it's always looking to continuously improve, so a continuous year-on-year financial target can be met, often in the form of a cost reduction target can be met, and a process improvement and a service improvement target can be met on a year-on-year basis. And one way in which that continuous improvement can be elegantly tracked is through gathering benchmarking data or KPI data that you use internally to track that progress, but also to cross-reference it with your peer group, your industry, other shared services organizations that might run off a similar ERP to you, might be in a similar industry to you, or might be a similar size to you. So then you can really see where your opportunities for improvement really are. So benchmarking data in itself, which is largely based on key performance indicator data and beneath that wider metrics, is really, really valuable. It's a very powerful thing within the world of shared services. And what we have all identified, I believe, is that some benchmarking data is actually more meaningful than others. So I like to use the word loaded. Some benchmarking data or data sets are indeed more loaded. They tell a richer and deeper and wider story than another data set. And this is what we're really going to be focusing this webinar on today. We're going to be really honing in on the chief key performance indicators, which on the whole are the fairly loaded ones. So with that in mind, I'd like to introduce Julie May from ESCA. Over to you, please, Julie.
Thanks. Looking forward to gathering all this information and talking with you a little bit about the KPIs that you're having within your organization and then comparing it to what we're seeing out there in the shared services world. A couple housekeeping items as we get started. We are on both Twitter and on LinkedIn, and as far as this particular webinar, if you'd like to follow us, the hashtag is #QuitPaper, and we are at Esker Inc. is our information as far as how you can be a follower of us on Twitter, and we would love to have you included. And we do publish other things out there, and interestingly enough, at the exact same time today, we actually have 2 different webinars going on. So we're very busy kind of sharing information out there in the world and trying to help organizations move to a better place as far as automating a number of different processes. As far as Esker itself goes, you see our little QuitPaper symbol up in the upper right-hand corner. And while it used to be QuitPaper was something that all organizations would just smile and know that they had piles of paper at home or in the office, now it's become almost more of a QuitPaper, and also looking at any of those manually intensive processes that you have where documents are still coming in, but now maybe they're an image as opposed to an actual piece of paper that you're working from, but there's still a lot of, keying that gets done, a lot of passing documents around an organization, and a lot of next steps involved with that. So we help companies to kind of automate those processes and look to have better productivity and also just less manual tasks involved for doing those type of things. We have a global footprint. Our headquarters is in Lyon, France. Our United States headquarters and the headquarters for the Americas is in Madison, Wisconsin. And then we also have a number of different offices around the country in both Australia and around Europe and Asia. We've actually been in business for over 24 years, and we've been in the cloud for 8 years, which is interesting in that the cloud is definitely the hot topic of the day when you talk to different individuals who are looking to make initiatives within the IT world. And when you're talking about being in the cloud, a lot of organizations are just making that leap with their applications, or they are newer organizations. So we're kind of in a unique spot in that we've actually been doing our processing in the cloud for 8 years while we still have the option of an on-site installation. And so as we kind of look at moving to a discussion about what we're going to cover in this webinar, the very first thing we're going to talk about is the importance of benchmarking. And then we're going to move into those KPIs that Susie had mentioned, and looking at 7 common metrics as well as 1 kind of common question that helps to lay the groundwork for the discussion. And then we will go ahead and compare those to where you're at versus kind of what we're seeing for best in class. And then we will move on to different success factors as you're trying to improve your KPIs within your organization and move towards being best in class for these different types of activities. We'll also finally go ahead and talk about a case study about a customer that I work with who had, a shared service model that they were moving towards, and we're looking to take these same KPIs and be able to improve upon them and start to move towards that best in class status. And then about the last 10 minutes or so, we're going to go ahead and do the question and answers. As you're talking about benchmarking, the truth is that you can't manage what you can't measure. And we've heard that said many, many times in regards to different things other than KPIs, but also in relation to KPIs. And the truth of the matter is that while you can't manage what you can't measure, you also want to make sure that you're aligning your KPIs that you are measuring in line with your organizational goals, and those goals that are outlined, to your shareholders or out to the public in general, and then also to your departmental goals. So then the second part of that is that you also want to make sure that you're doing a consistent evaluation over time, and that the way that you're measuring those things is consistent, so you can get a true read on if you're improving or if you're staying where you are, or hopefully not, but if you're moving backwards, that's something that's important to know as well. So as we start to look at these different things, we're going to kind of move into talking about, how do those KPIs stack up in your world? And we'll go ahead and look at the specific KPIs with industry metrics, and then we'll go ahead and show you kind of what we're seeing out in the world for shared services. So as we move into this first question, this one does not actually have a KPI that's going to be associated with it, but the very first thing that we're asking you to kind of help us with is just looking at the quantity of documents that you're processing in your organization to kind of get a feel for, the scale of the organization that you're working within. With that, Susie, I'll go ahead and hand it back over to you.
Thank you very much, Julie. So coming up on your screen now, how many invoices do you process per annum? Less than 100,000, 100 to 200, 200 to 500, 500,000 to 1 million, or more than 1 million invoices. And just to really draw on what Julie was mentioning there, this is not a kind of a KPI question. It's not one of the 7 KPIs, but it is a contextual question. So it really helps us understand the scale of the organizations that we're talking about and actually applying the KPI set or KPI numbers to. We're at 58% of you voting. We are looking for high participation, please, as it is a benchmarking webinar. So the average that we look for, I will share that with you, it's 70%. So I'm hoping, ladies and gentlemen, that we can really build on that for the next 50 or so minutes. We're on 73% of you voting. So I will close the poll. 3, 2, 1. 77% of you voted there. Let's have a look at some of the data coming up on your screen now. So what we're looking at really is about a third of you processing less than 100,000 invoices per annum, and then we're moving into the kind of the mid-range with quite a large chunk of you really processing between 100,000 and 1 million invoices. So just over 50% of you processing those kinds of volumes, and 16% of you actually representing high volume organizations, accounts payable operations, processing more than 1 million invoices per annum. Interesting results. Back to you, please, Julie.
Thank you. And with that, we'll go ahead and we'll move into that first question, which is a KPI item, and that has to do with the number of documents that are being processed per employee. And this has to do, obviously, with productivity within your shared service center, because the more documents somebody can process, the more productive they are. And so this is kind of that first key metric that we talk to customers about quite frequently. And with that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you, Susie.
Thank you very much indeed. So coming up on your screen now, how many invoices do you process per full-time employee per annum? So as Julie mentioned there, this is really talking about your productivity levels. It's a very loaded KPI because the more productive your FTE is, the more likely it is that you have a high first-time match rate and a very efficient process. Your invoices that come in are PO-backed. Your procurement team is probably aligned with finance and are actually being very compliant with the purchase-to-pay process rules. And chances are, if you're in the 25,000 or more range per annum, you're doing a lot of automation. So it's a very, very loaded KPI, this one. Only 59% of you have voted, so if you haven't already done so, we did ask you to do your homework and bring your stats with you. So if you didn't have a chance to do that, please make a very good calculated guess. And it's quite a simple one, the calculation. It's your total invoice volume divided by the number of people that you have in accounts payable. We normally put the AP managers and AP heads to one side, but we include pretty much everybody else in that sum. Closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. We're on 74% of you voting there. So coming up on your screen now. So again, it's quite interesting. 33% of you are less than 9,000, and I wonder if that's kind of the same or similar. 33% that are processing 100,000 invoices or less. You normally find that the more invoices you have, the more productive your FTEs actually are in processing the volume of invoices per annum. So you would expect there to be lower productivity in the 100,000 invoices or less per annum range. And then we've got 20%, the 3% plus the 17%, coming in at 25,000 invoices or more per annum. So that's certainly encouraging. Back to you, please, Julie. And back to you, please, Julie.
Thanks, Susie. In regards to how these invoices compare to what we see for KPIs within the organization, as far as looking at how productive different organizations are when we look at best in class and top non-performers, and then as far as organizations that are not automated. When you look at it, there's a remarkable difference between that best in class and the non-automated organizations. Almost between 5 and 6 times more productive when you're looking at those best in class versus organizations that have no automation whatsoever. So as you are looking at opportunities within your organization, it's always good to see, how much more quickly you're going to be able to process documents and how many less touches you can have that are involved in getting a document from the point where it's accepted into your organization to the point where it's paid and it's now archived within your organization. And the faster you can do that and the less number of touches and steps required, the higher number of invoices each person will be able to process. With that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it back over to you, Susie. And the next benchmark item that we're going to talk about is how much does it cost to process invoices? And with that, it's really looking at the overall cost of doing it, not just the manpower associated with it, but also anything else that you have that's included with that, from printers to storage to anything else, is what we typically encourage everybody to take into consideration. And as far as kind of putting the poll question up, I'm going to go ahead, Susie, and ask you to do that now.
So coming up on your screen now, ladies and gentlemen, as Julie was talking about there, when we're asking about what is your cost per invoice for processing, just to be absolutely clear with the taxonomy that we use here at Shared Services Link, the clock starts ticking the moment the invoice comes into your organization, be it your accounts payable organization, shared services, or the business. So that's when the clock starts ticking. The clock stops ticking when the invoice is posted on your system or your ERP and is actually ready for payment. So that's the range in terms of length. And then what we include in it is we do not include the cost to raise a purchase order, but we do include any costs associated with the invoice being out in the business. We include all invoice types, so for example, PO, non-PO, electronic, paper, automated, all invoice types, and from third parties only. So if you're clear on all of that, please tick the right box for you. We're only at 58% of you responding, so if you haven't already done so, we will be sharing these results live, ladies and gentlemen. So if I can encourage those that haven't already responded to tick the box appropriate to them, closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. We were at 72%, 73% of you responding there. So it's fairly even spread. Very encouragingly, though, we have over a quarter of you coming in at less than $2. And I think it's probably fair to say that you need to have high levels of automation in order to break that $2 barrier. So that's very encouraging indeed. And 14% of you really spending $14 or more on each of your transactions. And if you're talking about 1 million transactions at $14 or more, you're really talking about an awful lot of money, $14 million annually, to actually just pay suppliers. So that's quite a terrifying figure, really, when you look at it like that. So interesting results. Back to you, please, Julie.
Thank you. And when you look at the KPIs for industry metrics in regards to cost per invoice for processing at the different levels of automation and at the different levels of performance across shared service centers, the top performing shared service centers are, pretty close to that $2 mark, because they're at $2.24, and then it goes up from there, obviously, with the average being around $7 and the bottom at around $14.50, which, if you look at it from overall perspective as far as, are you able to increase your value within the organization for your department? If you are in that top performing group, you are able to process 7 times more documents than if you were in that bottom for the same exact price to your organization. So that's something that really can motivate organizations to look at ways to decrease that cost per invoice, because it allows you to literally take that money and put it right on the bottom line as you're able to bring that cost per document down considerably over time and through adding different processes that help to automate. And when you're looking to do those things, we are going to also move into benchmark number 3, because one of the things that is important to know when you're looking to decrease that cost per invoice is to look at the invoices that may process automatically. And these would be documents that come into your organization and you really don't need to have anything done other than they need to be manually keyed or need to have whatever your standard practices involved, but they don't have any sort of discrepancy handling and they aren't waiting for anything to be paid. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you, Susie, for the poll question.
Thank you very much indeed, Julie. So coming up on your screen, ladies and gentlemen, what is your percentage of invoices that match first time and are approved before the event? So it's not retrospective application of the purchase order. The PO is on the invoice when it actually arrives in the Accounts Payable Organizational Shared Services Center. And these are the ones that really are very, very suitable for automatic processing and posting. So are you at 91% or more, 85 to 90%, 70 to 84%, 60 to 69%, or 59% or less? So this really is referring to your first-time match rate. Only 51% of you have responded. This is referring to all your invoices, so all your PO and non-PO volume, and all your invoice types. So if you could share that statistic with us, please. We're only at 60% of you responding. Closing the poll, ladies and gentlemen. Let's see if we can just nudge that up a little bit more, please. Closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Okay. It's the lowest response there, I'm afraid. We came in at 64%. So all I can imagine there is that perhaps that's not a stat that's commonly known for the other 36% of you. And I encourage you to go out and find it, please, because it's another loaded KPI. It tells a lot of stories. That one, it's one of my favorites. So 30, again, it's quite common. We're coming up with 33%. 33% of have 59% or less first-time match rate. So some of the critical success factors, 3 critical success factors that Julie and I share with you at the end of this session will hopefully help you increase that number. And well done to the 12% who are coming in at 91% or more. And back to you, please, Julie.
Thank you. The best-in-class groups are really looking at about 85% of invoices that match the first time. Now you can imagine that these groups, these organizations have done a lot of work to make sure that when they issue a purchase order and when they receive an invoice, their staff in both purchasing and AP know what each other are doing. They work very closely together because they are getting very, very high rates of matching. Industry average is about 70%, and then laggards are down at 65%, which, even that 65% is a pretty darn high number if you consider that those are all documents that could have had the potential to automatically process if everything was there and ready to go. So as you're looking at these numbers and you're seeing that you are, your ballpark that you're in doesn't match up necessarily with these so well, that's an area where there's a lot of opportunity for you to be able to take that as metric that you want to improve upon potentially. And even if you can take it and move it 10%, those documents when they're coming in, even if they're not automated, they at least have the potential to be processed right away instead of having to have other things done with them. So this is one that might be a little hard to track if you're not used to tracking it, but one that we really encourage people to start kind of diving into. The next question that we're going to talk about is how timely are your payments, and of course this has to do somewhat with that document about matching automatically the first time that it comes in, but this has to do also with how quickly you're able to turn the documents around once they're received. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you, Susie, for the poll question.
Thank you very much, Julie. So what is your percentage of invoices paid to terms? That's 90 or more percent, or 90% or more, I should say, 80% to 89%, 70% to 79%, 60% to 69%, or 59% or less. And whilst you're just responding to that, this is one I find that actually does need to be told in collaboration, if you will, with other KPIs. And the reason being because if you have very stretched payment terms and you're really uniformly paying invoices at either 60 or 90 days, and your payment on time rate is actually very, very high, that's not necessarily indicative of a very efficient process, because it could suggest that actually you're processing a lot of invoices by day 59. However, if your payment your payment terms are 30 days and your payment on time rate is very, very high, that is indicative of a polished and efficient process. So it really does depend on your payment terms and the day at which you pay invoices. We're at 67% of you responding, so if you haven't already done so, please do let us know what your percentage of invoices paid to terms is. Coming in at 72%, closing the bowl, ladies and gentlemen, in 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look at the results. Coming up on your screen now. So you should be seeing that now. We've got 25% of you coming in at 90% or more, and then we've got 7% of you, so a very small volume, coming in at 59% or less. So interesting results. Back to you, please, Julie.
Thank you. As we look at the best-in-class, most organizations that are best-in-class are looking at about a 95% on-time payment rate. I would have to agree completely that that is interesting to look at in the context of also how far out do they negotiate those terms, because that's something that a lot of organizations will do, as well as they'll try to negotiate the terms out so that if they're able to take advantage of discounts, those discounts are able to be taken advantage of for a little bit longer period. But the information is interesting that they're at 95%, others are at 72%, and then when we look at our own numbers, we are, about, let's see, when I add the numbers together, they are probably about 40% would be less than 72% paid on time. So it seems like it might be an area that is indicative either of payment terms that are set very, very stringently, and that could have something to do with the economy, or it could also be a matter of areas where the service center might have some really good opportunities to be able to tighten up the processes that are in place and be able to pay things more quickly, so that you can then start to look at discount options with some of your vendors that you work with. With that, we're going to go ahead and look at, are you taking advantage of discounts, which is benchmark number 5. And that's something that is a little bit of an interesting topic, because we do have some companies that we work with that tell us that they take discounts even if they're not technically entitled to them. And that's another question altogether. But for this poll question, we're going to go ahead and turn it over to Susie to put up the poll.
Thank you very much indeed. So what is your percentage of negotiated discounts captured? Is it 50% or more, 40 to 49%, 30 to 39%, 20 to 29%, or 19% or less? So if you could share that statistic with us. And whilst you're doing that, just to talk a little bit about this huge opportunity for dynamic discounting that we are currently within. We are sitting nice and squarely in this opportunity, which really it hasn't come across or come along before. And what I'm talking about is this kind of perfect storm of a lot of enterprise companies that typically run shared services, have high volumes of invoices. They've taken a lot of their investments out of Europe, for example, and their coffers are now full. A lot of organizations are very, very cash rich and haven't started reinvesting that money yet. So bank accounts are full, interest rates are low, yet a lot of the suppliers are the small suppliers that don't have the luxury of having their bank accounts kind of sloshing around with lots and lots of cash. They need cash and are still struggling to get money from banks for loans. So this is a perfect setup to take advantage of dynamic discounting, where you can pay your supplier a little bit earlier because they need the cash, and for that take a little bit of a percentage, which is great for you because it's going to be a greater percentage than you're going to get if the cash is still sitting around in your bank account. So we have 62% of you responding. If you haven't already responded, please do so. Closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look at the results. Really encouraging stats. So we did actually run this webinar a couple of months ago, and we ran it because it was very popular. I'm sure the stats were not as encouraging as the stats are here. So I think what this tells me and us perhaps is that dynamic discounting is something that is very topical in the North American market, and I think the European market still has to really embrace this. But as I say, it's a window that is closing because it is a perfect storm, and we really are kind of sitting squarely within it. So when one of those factors change, like interest rates go up, then that's going to have a huge impact on the opportunity for dynamic discounting, and we'll move towards that window being closed. So interesting results. They're very, very encouraging indeed, and I urge you, if you're not in the kind of the top 50% or more bracket, and you're the 42% that's in the other brackets, I urge you to look at really capturing your negotiated discounts. Back to you, please, Julie.
Thank you. I find this one to be really interesting because you're right, Susie. I actually have the numbers in front of us from the last time we ran the webinar, and we were at 43% had 50% or more that they were able to capture, and now we've moved up to 58%. And then when you look at the KPIs as far as kind of best in class, that percentage is actually at about 31%. So it seems like there's, definitely something happening between the time when a lot of these studies were done and these reports were written and what's happening now, as far as organizations may have in the past not been as eager to look at those discounts as something that could truly add, cash to the company. But it seems as though that's something that's definitely getting a much stronger push as, things are changing in the economic means, and then also from a shared services center. In the past and at times where some of these reports were compiled, the movement of documents around and the payments, may have not have been as centralized. They might not have had standardized processes, so it made it very difficult for organizations to capture those discounts. Industry average is around 24%, and then the laggards are at about 15% of those negotiated discounts that are being captured. So it's an area that seems to be kind of changing rapidly, and I know that there are definitely a lot of different ways that you can look at getting better discounts, and also looking at ways to kind of have those dynamic discounts, which really you have in control then as far as how much you're capturing from a discount rate, as well as how quickly you can get those documents processed through your system. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next question, which is the number of suppliers that are in your universe. And, as far as this item goes, the reason that it's important is because of the fact that the more suppliers you have, the more different ways you need to communicate potentially, the different document types you might be getting in, the different just plain personalities that you're dealing with. And so as we look at this, it's something that's a newer one that's being measured, and I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you, Susie, for the poll question.
Thank you, Julie. It's coming up on your screen. Please share with us, what is your number of suppliers per 10,000 invoices? Is it less than 50, 51 to 150, 151 to 300, 301 to 500, 501, or more? And really what we're talking about here is the live suppliers that you've used in the last 12 months. So as Julie said there, the more invoices you have, the more suppliers you have, the chances are the more the more complicated or inefficient your invoice process will be, because you've just got a lot more users in the process to educate on what they should be doing, what a compliant invoice looks like. So the communication effort is much greater, and there is greater opportunity for error because you've got more people in the mix. So only 44% of you have responded. You might not know this one because, as Julie said, it is one that at sharedserviceslink.com we're just beginning to capture, and we did put it out there a few months ago as a new KPI to really start to be considered seriously within accounts payable. So you might not have this one, but I do suggest that you start gathering it, please. Right, we're at 53%. If you haven't already responded, please do so. Closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Coming in at 54% there, ladies and gentlemen. Let's have a look at the stats coming up on your screen now. Okay, so obviously with this one, you want the number to be as low as possible. So well done to the 14% that were coming in at less than 50 suppliers for every 10,000 invoices. And encouragingly, we've got 14% for those top 3 brackets. If you're starting to move into the few hundreds, 500 or more, so maybe at some stage that is a time to do some consolidation and to work with procurement to start making sure that spend is being channeled through a limited amount of suppliers rather than a wider number of suppliers. Back to you, please, Julie.
Sounds good. Interesting that we had 14, 14, 14 on those top 3 brackets.
Yeah.
And like I said, this is one where we actually don't even have kind of the industry KPIs out there because it's something that we're just looking to start measuring now. But you're right, Susie, as far as managing those relationships and being able to have the purchasing department be able to take advantage of we do more business with you as a vendor, so can we get a better discount? Can we get better pricing? Those are all things that are starting to really be explored as organizations are really moving towards a procure-to-pay organization as opposed to just looking at it from a strictly, I'm purchasing, I'm AP, and the two worlds shall never meet type of perspective. So it's encouraging to see as we are able to, decrease those number of suppliers and be able to have better relationships with your vendors as well. The last item that we have listed is looking at how much automation has already been implemented. And when we talk about this, we actually kind of have a few definitions that we'll go through to help you answer that question, kind of looking at a self-assessment there, and it's obviously a very quick self-assessment. But I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you, Susie, to be able to bring up that poll question so that we can have people respond as we go through kind of what those definitions are.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. So where do you see yourself on the path to automation for your AP process? Is it high levels of automation, medium levels of automation, or low? So just from a definition perspective, when we're talking about high, we're really talking about the majority of your invoice volumes are now automated. So that's either they're coming in electronically, they're coming in an automated fashion. They're very low touch points. And it's really having a big impact on your KPIs. If you strike the medium range, then that probably means that you are partially automated. You've just really started on the road, so it's not the majority of your invoices that are automated or electronic, but you're moving in that general direction. But there's still a lot of manual touch points within your invoice process. And low, that would really be defined as lots of touch points, lots of paper, and no real application of technology right now. So if you haven't already responded, we're only at 59% of you responding on that one. So let's try and bump that number up, please. It is, I believe, our last poll question. So this is the last thing we're asking you to do. So if you haven't already responded, please do so. Closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look at the results. So we are at 69% of you responding. So coming up on your screen now. We can see we've got 28% actually would put themselves in the low category, so at the beginning of the journey, 43% really in the middle of that journey, and really kind of deploying enabling technologies throughout accounts payable. And we've got 30% of you saying that you have a high level of automation, so congratulations to you. Back to you, please, Julie.
Great, thank you. And when we look at kind of industry metrics, we're not too far off of where we ended up with our own group here that's doing the poll questions, because an average number of people that are looking at feeling that they're highly automated is at 23%, and we thought we were at 30. Medium automation is at that 48%, and we were at 43, and then low is the 29%, and we were at 28. So pretty darn close to what you see out there kind of when you do a broader look at things. And one thing I'd like to add is that, when you reach those higher levels of automation, you're also able to get such greater visibility into your process so that when you're asked to kind of compile some of these different KPIs and start to measure where you're at so you know how much better you're getting, potentially, it's much easier to even compile this information. So even if you're starting to kind of make those first forays into automation or you're at that medium level, you probably had looked at the list of things that we asked you to put together for this call and had thought that it wasn't that much work. Whereas if you're in that lower percentage or in the group that hasn't automated hardly at all, some of these numbers probably really feel like, if I was going to do the work to even gather this information, it would be a tremendous effort. So even being able to, know where you're at is something that is a huge improvement as you're looking to make the path of automation, looking to move down that path of automation. The next thing we want to talk about is to go ahead and talk about those success factors as you're working to improve those KPIs and move towards that best-in-class standing in these different areas of your business. And there's really 3 different things that we try to key in on and that we work with clients on when they're trying to improve those KPIs. And the first one is really choosing the appropriate KPIs, and that has to do, like we had mentioned earlier in the meeting, with really aligning those KPIs with the goals of your organization and with the things that are going to allow you to have a better process for yourself, but also for your vendors, and be able to really make that procure-to-pay process one that vendors are eager to do business with you. The next item that we are going to look at in regards to choosing your appropriate KPIs is being able to have data that's high-quality data to ensure that your measurements are accurate. And I know that I alluded to that a little bit, talking about how much automation you had in place, and one doesn't necessarily equate directly to the other, but it definitely helps you to be able to have better ways of measuring things. And then the other item that we talk about is using industry metrics for management buy-in. So as you're putting together your ROI for a project, or as you're trying to make the case to even consider doing an ROI for a project, if you look at these industry metrics and you use some of these KPIs that are out there and published in different sources, and the sources that we chose to utilize in order to put together these poll questions are from just a very wide variety of different analysts and reports and white papers and things that are out there. So these are things that are not just, Esker customers, or not just organizations that Susie works with. These are across the board. And they're really good sources to help you see where you stand in regards to processes and being able to compare yourself against others that have shared service models. But then those things can also be used to help to create that project and to get the right people at the table in order to make this something that's going to happen within your organization. And when we talk about having these things happen in your organization, one item that is really, really key is change management. And truly, the success of a project can be directly tied to the acceptance level and the support that that project gets across the organization. So it's directly tied from the acceptance level of the end users, but then also, is this a project that was accepted by the IT staff that's involved and accepted by the upper management as something that's going to be important for the organization. And when we look at that sponsorship and support, moving on to the next item, we really try to have everyone at the table when we're having a discussion about these items and helping organizations add automation to a process. Because if you have that upper management support for the project and you have somebody that's standing behind it from those higher levels in the organization, it really allows everybody to have a shared vision of where you're going. But you also want to make sure that you're including that processing team in the discussion, and that's because they are the ones that are going to be using the system day in and day out. And so that really feeds into that user input, that's the last item listed there, and encouraging suggestions early and often in the process, and really getting the new functionality into the hands of people as quickly as possible so that they're able to give you that feedback when you can still make adjustments as the project is moving forward. With that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Susie to talk about that third item, and that's the global service owner.
That's great. Thanks, Julie. So many of you would have heard of the relatively new, I'd say probably in the last 3 or 4 years, job title, the Global Process Owner. And we're generally seeing that that is something that's being widely adopted. People or companies still have a different view as to what the power of the Global Process Owner should be. So that's another conversation. But what we're seeing now is the overarching responsibility really lying with the global service owner. So this is a really new job title that we've been seeing in the last 12 months. And the global process owners have been now reporting into the global service owners, and it's really kind of dovetailing in very elegantly with this development within shared services, where shared services organizations are now not so process-centric in their discussion with the customer, the business unit. They're focusing much more on service delivery. So it's really sinking in very elegantly with that trend on service delivery. So what that means is that there's much more of a development of service lines rather than a focus on the processes. So it's really looking at what the business wants and what the shared services organization needs to deliver in terms of actual service rather than being process-centric. I mentioned that process owners are now reporting into service owners, and it's the service owners that are actually now responsible for customer satisfaction. So they are really the kind of the main conduit between the shared services organization, the processes that sit within that organization, and the business units. So really very responsible for customer satisfaction, and really as well being the voice that communicates the KPI development to the business and reporting specific KPIs that the customer might care about to the business. So that's an exciting development that we've been seeing recently. Back to you, please, Julie.
Great. Thank you so much. We're going to go ahead and look at a case study next as far as the items that go, and I know that go ahead and talk about this company a little bit, and then after that we'll go ahead with the questions and answers. So the case study itself is a chemical company that I was working with, and they are a large global organization that has a shared service model now. And at the time that we started talking, they were in the process of moving to that shared services model, and they had many different processes around the globe. So, and it wasn't even, one country did it one way. It was one division did it one way, and within that same country, another location might do something completely different. And they even had, different processes as far as who needed to approve things. There was not kind of shared vision as far as what could go through without having to have an approval versus what was pre-approved, because sometimes even when there was a purchase order, it still required approvals. So as they were looking at different things, they were looking for ways to be able to align to have some global processes, but still allow different organizations within the larger infrastructure to have flexibility. And then also looking for things that would allow for use on a global perspective and being able to have room for growth, because what they had currently put together utilizing some in-house homegrown applications was failing for them because of the scale, and it didn't have the ability to do some multiple languages and different things that they really needed to have done. So when they first started looking at different solutions, they were trying to focus on a cloud solution because they wanted to be able to use it for multiple processes, but also, like so many organizations out there, their IT resources were really, really strapped. They were in the middle of an upgrade. They had many other projects in place, and pretty much were told, if you want to do something, it's going to have to be minimally invasive to the IT staff, because while the IT staff definitely wanted to be involved in the process, they did not have the bandwidth to help necessarily with a lot of hands-on during the implementation period. So as we were looking at different things, we were working with them, and the end result was that they were able to come up with a solution that allowed them to have a global process worldwide and can handle multiple languages, and it allows it for both data extraction and then also for user fields on the document when they're actually looking at the screen for processing. They're able to have those full reporting capabilities that we talked about. So when they moved that shared service model, and we started talking about where are you today with number of documents that are being processed, and some of these KPIs that we're talking about, they really didn't have a great way of measuring many of those things, and now they are, and they're moving more and more towards those best-in-class standings for these types of measurements. The other thing that they found was that they had kind of what they referred to as their AP black hole, and that was because with the multiple processes, they also had multiple points of entry. It took different amounts of time from those different points of entry in different locations around the world to actually even have visibility to the fact that there was an invoice out there waiting to be approved. And right now, with having everything land in one spot, they are able to say, you know, with a high degree of confidence that they know what's out there and needs to be processed and paid. And because of that added reporting and no more black holes, they're able to decrease that time of receipt to release a payment, and they're able to control it better because they actually know what's out there and what needs to be paid. And now they're moving to that next step where they're actually approaching their vendors and starting to talk to them about things like dynamic discounting and being able to negotiate terms a little bit more, because now they can truly control the process, whereas before they were kind of in a, when I met them, they told me that they felt like they were in a perpetual fire drill, which, you know, they were exhausted. So it's great to work with them and great to see these things happening as they're able to take advantage of these different things that automation has afforded them. Could talk about them for quite a while, but I know we want to leave some time for questions and answers. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it back over to you, Susie.
Thank you so much, Julie. That was really very, very interesting. So ladies and gentlemen, now is your time. We've got about 7 minutes for Q&A. Please start putting your questions through. We've already got a number of them, but please put your questions through to us. So Julie, first question from a listener who's familiar with taking what she refers to as an earned discount. She wants to know what is the dynamic discounting bit?
A dynamic discount is something that is worked out with vendors where there are multiple levels, is probably a good way of thinking about it, of discounting, so that it's dynamic based upon the combination of what that % discount is and where you pay in payment terms. So historically, you might see 1% discount if they pay within net 10, but in a dynamic discount world, it might be something like you can get a percentage and a half if you pay within 3 days, and then it might drop down to a % if it's within 10 and a half a % if it's within 15, say. And so it does require you to have some capability to measure those things and to have good ways of tracking them from both the vendor and the supplier perspective, but it's really a great way for the two sides to kind of both get what they want out of that relationship when it comes to payment terms.
Okay, this could be quite a specific question, but I'm going to give it a go. So when your organization, Julie, is national or international with elements widely dispersed, so quite decentralized, how do you decrease the number of repair and maintenance suppliers without a reduction in services?
That is quite a specific question. I would say every organization is going to have some of those regional or local vendors that are required just in order to do business and keep your systems up and running. And some of those are not necessarily areas where you're going to be able to decrease the number of vendors for those areas, because somebody that's an HVAC repair person in Madison, Wisconsin probably is not going to have a division, in Lyon, France, for example. But the way that you can help to be able to do some of those things is to be able to really kind of focus on the vendors that are, supplying the goods for the items that you're manufacturing or that you're servicing, and being able to concentrate on the areas where you can have a supplier that can handle multiple lines or multiple locations for you, and realize that every business is a little bit different. So you might not be able to get to the levels of, only 50 vendors per 10,000 invoices, but you might be able to get to that next level, as opposed to trying to always get, because of, the type of business you have is definitely going to depend upon what your opportunity is in that area.
Okay, good. Thank you, Julie. So when you're, let's say that I'll take this question. Is this a difference, but is there a difference between the global process owner and the global service owner? So, and I think the layer behind or beneath that question is, does the global service owner replace the global process owner? And the answer is no, it does not replace it, especially if you're quite a high volume organization. So what we're finding, just to reiterate, is that there are lots of process owners. So there's purchase to pay, record to report, order to cash. Each of those processes require a process owner to sign off on the technology that touches their process, to sign off on policy documentation that talks about what the right process looks like, what the wrong process looks like. That's not the service owner, the global service owner, who would do that. The process owners, in some cases, not all cases, are beginning to report into the global service owner, and that really, as I mentioned, is the person that's very customer-centric, customer-facing, and is the kind of the conduit between the business and the shared services organization to really make sure that the service that's being delivered, which is very reliant on the processes that are taking place within the shared services organization, are what the business wants. So I hope that answers your question. Moving on to a question for you, please, Julie. How are you seeing people approach automation in markets like Latin America?
And I guess I'm not 100% certain as to what they're asking, but when you're talking about approaching things like Latin America, I know that we actually have a manager who is focusing specifically on Latin America, because I know that they have some very specific laws regarding the way that documents are processed and the requirements for reporting on invoices that are being processed. So I would say that when you're looking at ways to automate in those parts of the world, it's important to work with a vendor that, you know, has a presence or has people in the organization that are familiar with what the requirements are there, and that can help you stay in compliance and at the same time improve your processes. And I know that's a very high-level answer, but there's a lot of little bits and pieces about it when you're talking about those countries. So.
We're also seeing that there's a big push for automation and electronic in countries like Mexico, countries like Brazil. I think a lot of us are very aware of the mandate that's taking place in Mexico. So there's from a governmental perspective, the governments are being very proactive about this being a problem, and there's quite an interesting development there as well. So we were asked how many people are on the webinar, and it's just over 100 people, so that's a good sample to be having on this webinar today. So happy to share that information with you. A question for you, Julie, if I may, around dynamic discounting. What kind of motivation would an organization have to take discounts if their return on cash is actually higher?
Well, and I guess that is an excellent point, because when you're looking at it, most organizations are finding that their return on cash right now is quite low. So if they're able to get a discount by paying quickly, that's something that's truly motivating for a lot of organizations at this point in time with kind of the global economy as it sits. You as an organization may not have that scenario in place, so you may find that you discuss it at the higher levels in the organization, and they make the decision, nope, we're going to keep our cash as long as possible. But that's an important thing for your AP staff to know as well, because that all works into, once a document is approved for payment, you have control then as to when you release the payment. But if it takes longer for you to get through that approval process, then you have less control at the end, because you're in that hurry up, we need to get this thing paid, as opposed to, okay, this thing is set, ready to go. Now let's decide when it makes the most sense for our organization to release the cash. So it's two very different points of power, I guess, as you look at it, depending upon how automated your process is, because you'd still want to have your process as automated as possible, so you make that decision about releasing the cash at the right time, and you make a decision as an organization as to, does the dynamic discounting make sense for you, or are you better to wait to the end of those terms of payment and maybe not take the discounts, but instead take advantage of that cash in the bank for your organization.
Okay, thank you. So really just time for two more questions, I'm afraid. So one question I'll put to you is, how do you approach the reduction of the number of active vendors in your vendor master data?
And as you're looking at the number of vendors that you have, most organizations that we work with go through what they call a vendor rationalization process, and they try to categorize their vendors. So, for example, if they had, let's say they were buying widgets and they had 8 vendors that were supplying widgets, there might be a very valid reason that you'd want to have 2, because that way you have a backup and you always have somebody that is going to have a supply in case your primary vendor is running low or if there's some sort of bottleneck at a specific organization. But you might not need to have 10. And so when you're looking at those type of things, really what you need to do is take a look at the universe of vendors that you're working with, see which vendors have overlap. And the other thing that's important to look at is which vendors can serve multiple purposes where maybe you're not taking advantage of everything that they're doing, and you could have a single vendor that could handle multiple things so that you could reduce the number of vendors that you have over the overall universe, but be able to still get the same services provided and the same products provided. And so that vendor rationalization process is really something that takes some time and needs to be a focus, and it's usually done in combination between the purchasing staff and the payment staff, so that everybody at the table understands how that vendor relationship sits and how good that vendor is to work with, and which vendors you might want to target to do more business with, and which ones might be better to be kind of escorted from your universe, so to speak. So.
Okay. Good. I'm afraid we are out of time. So thank you so much to Julie May. If you do want to contact her, which I'm sure you will, because there were lots of questions there, and unfortunately many of those were left unanswered because of time, you have her details there. So I know that she would be delighted to hear from you. And as far as what's coming up next on Shared Services Link, we do have a very exciting summit, the US Summit for Leaders in Shared Services, taking place in Atlanta, so make sure that you come and join us for that. We normally have about 100 end users there. It's a boutique event, very kind of intimate, lots of roundtable discussions, lots of kind of brainstorming sessions and problem-solving sessions go on. So we do limit the number of tickets that we sell. I do believe we've only got around 17 or 18 left, so if you haven't already registered for that, please do so promptly. And of course, please familiarize yourself with our upcoming webinar program. We've got some great webinars for you, much like the quality of webinar that we've just experienced today, ladies and gentlemen, taking place in September. So please do register for those. In the time being, best of luck with your accounts payable initiatives, and I look forward to welcoming you next time. Goodbye.